The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, curses, hexes, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep that results from listening to this podcast.
This is the Scream Kings podcast. I'm Max George.
And I'm Nathaniel Darkish.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to create a successful sequel. Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore, carnage candy. And number 3, never, ever, under any circumstances, assume the podcast is dead.
That feels appropriate considering how close I think the two of us have been to death in various ways.
Oh my god, what a couple of weeks, Nathaniel. I know we've been saying that a lot, it feels like, on the podcast, but life has just kind of been a little bitch lately.
Yeah, it definitely has. Just, weeks of illness in my household. Yeah, we've rescheduled this recording like 3 times, largely because I'm either, dealing with sick kids or just had no voice myself, or I don't know. Life comes at us hard when it likes to come at us.
Yeah, we've been dealing with some RSV. I started a new job, so that's been very time consuming and exhausting, so it's been nice to kind of slow down a little bit there, but again, we apologize. Thanks everyone for really leaning into our show. We've actually had quite substantial downloads, if I'm not mistaken, Nathaniel. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, we've been going strong. I would say the month of January was probably our second best month of all time, and this month is looking really good too. We've been maintaining really steady downloads in ways that we haven't seen up until this point, really. So thank you for everyone that's listening. We love you. We're glad that you're listening to the show. We have a lot of great stuff coming up in terms of guests and some really cool content that we'll be diving into moving forward. If, as long as we don't just, collapse a lung or something in the meantime. Let's talk about some movies.
If you haven't put it together, we're talking about the rest of the Scream franchise.
Well, at least everything except for the TV shows. We'll have to, I guess, revisit that soon. But we figured, 3 Scream films was probably more than enough to fill an episode.
Yeah, we're gonna really have to keep on pace here, Nathaniel. It's a lot to cover. All right, so let's kind of do a recap. We just saw the Legacy sequel, which is honestly my new favorite term to use talking about movies like this. Mm-hmm. Did talk about the Scream Legacy sequel and just how bloody brilliant it really was, and the just masterpiece that the first Scream movie is. And so, of course, we wanted to not delay any further, and we are now bringing to everybody the the rest of the movies. So let's dive into Scream 2.
Hello?
Hello, Sydney. Remember me?
What do you want?
It's time, girlfriend. Don't you know history repeats itself?
Okay, so Scream 2 is, I think, one of the better films in the series. It's, obviously it's not my very favorite. I would say currently it's my number 3. But I really like it. I think it's a really solid film, and I felt like it did a good job of approaching the idea of a horror, especially a slasher sequel, in a really fun, clever way. Particularly with all of the scenes involving Randy and his film classes and all of the discussions about, what makes a sequel good.
Yeah, Scream 2, it's one of those movies that we talk a lot on the show about sequelitis, where you get horror movie sequels that really just don't do the authentic show justice. It can be very tricky sometimes to really capture kind of that essence that the first movie blesses us with. Bless is a potent word, but I'm going to use it. And so Scream 2 does a banging job of like delivering what a sequel is. And again, I think this is in part because of what the Scream franchise does in it creates itself this meta universe where it can make fun of itself while maintaining a plot and while maintaining kind of a message, so to speak. And the message of Scream 2 is sequels.
Well, and I think like the fact also that, you know, we're not just, you know, looking at sequels, but we're also the fact that we have the same kind of major creative players back, that we have Wes Craven and also the original writer, Kevin Williamson, you know, delivering on this film as well as 3 and 4. Really, I think is why this whole series has been as strong as it has been. You know, obviously there's you know, stronger points and weaker points, but like I would say a lot of that consistency is consistency in vision. You know, this is being made by the same people, and they knew, you know, kind of as soon as Scream was a hit, that they had to make a sequel, and so it, you know, literally in the script asks the questions of, okay, so what makes a good sequel?
Exactly. And that, again, Scream is taking that concept and then producing a very well thought out story about it. Which is why, in some regard, we love Scream. Scream 3 and Scream 4, unfortunately, kind of don't deliver this as well. But let's kind of get into a few more of the positives about Scream 2, Nathaniel.
Yeah, so one thing I really like here is that our group dynamic really has kind of evolved from the previous film. You know, I like that we have the same heroes again, which is also something that a lot of times doesn't happen in especially slasher sequels. But the fact that we have Sidney, that we have Dewey, that we have, you know, we have Randy, we have Gale, like the gang is back together in a way that is really fun to watch because they know what to expect.
Yeah.
But do they? And like, you know, that they already have that rapport, and we don't get like a hard reset on, you know, the good that has kind of developed between them, that they have bonded over a shared traumatic experience, really does, you know, make us cheer for them more, because it's not just a bunch of, you know, rando squabbling teenagers like we usually get in a sequel.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The gang coming back together, but they're not the same individuals. A lot of times in sequels, we'll see these, you know, quote-unquote legacy characters. I don't know if they've quite reached legacy status in Scream 2. That's not a bad topic. Like, when does a character become a legacy, Nathaniel?
When there's a gap in time.
Yeah, agreed. Anyway, but they demonstrate through the filmography, cinematography, and just the dialogue that these characters have learned from the past. And that's very important, I think, in sequels, especially slashers. You know that one of my biggest problems are slashers who are invincible or immortal or have some sort of deified presence. And once again, this Scream movie doesn't kind of lean into that trope. The characters have learned, they're still learning, and they're still figuring it out in kind of the best way possible.
Definitely. And I like that also, like, we don't just see them more competent this time around. Like that is part of it, but there is also trauma ingrained into their experience, as well as, like, you know, like Dewey, like, literally, like, has a limp and he doesn't have as much movement in one of his arms and stuff like that because of getting stabbed. Like,
yeah,
there are both, you know, emotional and physical scars that inform what happens in this film.
And I think that is really important because it makes you care about these characters more. You see Dewey's limp and you remember, oh my god, Dewey was, you know, almost killed in this movie. We have to, you know, be careful. He has to be careful. It's really cool to feel that level of concern for a fictional character. And that physical representation, for me, it does a lot.
Well, and another thing that's so great is also, like, our stakes get risen a lot in this film, particularly, at the midpoint when Randy gets killed.
Yeah, and that's an incredible moment too. I think it's something that the newest Scream does well, is it takes a beloved character and then we have to deal with the fact that character is no longer with us, and it's kind of this twisted mind game where the character dying serves as motivation for the story and for our protagonists, but we're sad about it. We're not happy about it, and that conflict really generates good horror in my mind.
Yeah, well, and what I like about this is that Randy doesn't just get fridged, right? Like, and here, just, I guess, for anyone who may be unfamiliar with that term, so fridging is basically when a character is killed or, like, held ransom or whatever, just so a protagonist has a reason to care, right? Like, a lot of times this happens in a lot of comics where usually the hero doesn't want to get involved in something, and then a bad guy kills their girlfriend or spouse or whatever, and suddenly now they're involved. And, like, they were already involved in this situation with Randy already. They were all part of this. Admittedly, Sidney was trying to avoid it a little bit, but they were still there. They were involved, and it wasn't until he gets killed that I think we as an audience now see, oh, nobody's safe.
Well, and it's also important, I think, too, to remember that Randy plays a very prominent role in kind of the plot generation of Scream 2. He's the one, the silly little intro that I just read, that's an iconic horror line that comes from Randy in this moment of, trying to break down, there's this new killer on campus, what's going on, and it's Randy who gives us that information. And we're caring about this character, but then we have him stripped away, and that is troubling to kind of process through.
Another way that I like what this film does is really just some of the set pieces are just really cool.
Yeah, the end scene, like the little theater, whether you hate it or you love that scene, it's a very fun idea to kind of have the penultimate moment in this, like, college theater with this very Greco-Roman play going on. It was cool. Maybe I'm just a nerd like that, but I really loved that kind of moment,
Oh, no, it was super cool, and it looked phenomenal, and it just made the tension and the, I don't know, like, the spectacle of the film and those final kills just that much more engaging. Like, because, yeah, we've seen it go down in a house. Now we get to see it go down on a stage with all sorts of crazy props and stuff. Like, it just, again, it raises the stakes. And it's fun.
Probably my favorite moment, the part that really sticks out to me, is in the first film, Sidney Prescott is dealing with this internal struggle of believing her boyfriend is the killer. We don't know. We're not sure. She thinks he is, then he's not, but then he actually really is. And there's this very kind of traumatic undertone to Sidney of she doesn't really know what to believe anymore. Now, we fast forward to Scream 2, and this thing comes up again, but then they twist it on their head. They do make us believe that her new boyfriend, this college, beefcake, is the killer, and he has a lot of, like, sketchy tendencies and kind of a weird personality, and it's very pushing us in one direction. And then, again, in that penultimate scene, it's not him, and even Sidney thinks it's him, to the point where she lets him die because she thinks he's the killer. And it kind of takes your breath away, because you're like, wait, no, we're not supposed to believe he's the killer, but he's not the killer, but he really isn't the killer. It's just, they do it so well. It's so fun. It is so fun.
Yeah, it's how you use a red herring well, and then like, it's just such a gut punch when like you see it in her eyes that she can't trust him enough to untie him. She can't take that risk, and that's why he dies right in front of her. So it is kind of her fault. I mean, it's the fault of the person who stabs him ultimately, but she has something that she's going to be blaming herself for. And like that is such a twisted way to hurt your character way more than killing them. That's something that comes up a lot in writing groups and stuff like that. Is there's way worse things that you could do to your character besides just murder them, and this is a good example of that.
Yeah, and it helps the motivation. One of my biggest complaints about this movie is the motivation of the killers seems very contrived. I don't like revenge slashers. They just are kind of silly to me. And so this kind of twisted manipulation here goes a long way to make the villains a little bit more insidious. Mm-hmm. It gives them a little bit more kind of fear factor, so to speak.
Yeah, they're very good at what they do, even though unfortunately the kind of final reveal was a little flat.
A little?
I'll say a little.
I was very disappointed by this reveal, and I think because it is the sequel and the first film just delivered so well this double killer reveal, I was kind of expecting another double killer, which we got. Mm-hmm. However, the whole mother idea complex thing just, I don't know, Nathaniel, I just didn't vibe with it at all. It was not the vibe.
Now, I will definitely agree that, like, of the villains, this is one of the weaker batch. Okay, well, we'll get into that more with the other films. But, yeah, like, it being the mom, and just the random, college kid that she, manipulates into working with her, and he's just a sociopath or psychopath. Oh, yeah, I guess a psychopath. Just, I don't know. It's kind of weak. The reveals aren't that, like, because we didn't really know those characters super well, and so it wasn't that big of a twist.
Right. And that main killer, the, like, colleague or co-student, what is the word? I don't even know. Classmate, he kind of vanishes for a good 2/3 of the movie. He's a very prominent character in the beginning, but then after the big frat party, he just kind of dissolves, and we don't see much of him again until the reveal, which is silly.
I think that is ultimately the wrong choice, especially with like a character or like an actor that is as dynamic as Timothy Olyphant, and then only using him for a tiny sliver of the movie, and then having him still be important at the end, really, I felt like was the wrong call. And I think that's a shame, because, considering how tight and interesting and fun the rest of the movie is, the final reveals really was, the by far the weakest point, and what otherwise is a really, really solid movie.
A few other points that I didn't necessarily love. As we've kind of discussed, all of the screams are pretty sexist. This one, I think, tones it down pretty well. It's not as apparent in the first one or, say, the third one. But those still exist. It's a product of its times, but we need to recognize it and move forward and do better.
I still am not 100% on board with it being sexist, but okay.
You have notes for number 3, mister, about it being... Okay. No, I find it interesting, but I don't... We'll get into it. Okay.
I do want to just share one fun piece of trivia about Scream 2. I really love that because Scream was such a huge blockbuster success, there was a few leaked versions of the script that were out there that had different killers in the ending, just to throw people off the scent, and I love that.
Oh, that's awesome. I did not know that.
Yeah, I think there was like 3 different versions that were out there, and none of them were the real script.
Oh, I love it when movies kind of troll you like that.
Yeah.
More of that.
Well, should we move on to ratings so we can get into Scream 3?
Yeah, let's do it. For me, as far as Screams go, I give it a 3. It lacks something that the first one has quite substantially. I don't think it's as gory or as gritty.
Mm-hmm.
I gave it a 3. I don't know. The Screams, other than the first one, don't really scare me.
I think that's fair, except for maybe 5. But yeah, I would say I gave it a 4. There are a few kills that were kind of grody, but nothing too crazy. Yeah, considering that like literally the rules are more blood, more gore, carnage candy. It was a little bit on the light side of giving us that carnage candy.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Crowns wise, I give this one a 7. I really love this movie, but yeah, it's not the first one.
Yeah, as far as Crowns go, I give it a 6. It's a very good sequel. It's a very good horror sequel, but as we've discussed, it kind of drops the ball as the first one did. And to be fair, sequels are tricky things. They're very difficult to execute, if not equal to the original.
Yeah.
It's just how it is.
Speaking of weak sequels,
Ugh.
let's talk about Scream 3.
What do you know about trilogies?
All I know about movie trilogies is that in the third one, all bets are off.
Hello, Sydney. Welcome to the final act.
Oh, we're not spending a ton of time on this one because Scream 3 is trash. I do not like this movie.
See, I'm going to fight you on that.
I know. Okay, trash is probably a strong word.
Yes.
But it just falls apart for me.
Okay, well, so yes, like right off the bat, this is definitely, by far the weakest film in the Scream series. Like the kills are very tame, the gore is almost non-existent. So those are 2 problems, and like admittedly, that was kind of a socially conscious choice. You know, this comes from, this being post-Columbine, and they wanted to kind of tone things down a little bit. I don't think that was the right call. I think people do have the capacity to separate between, fantasy and real life in most cases, including the Columbine shooters. But it came from a good place, even though I think it was the wrong call.
I do want to be careful, though. I think we talked about this with Scream 5, is sometimes we let the nostalgia of the movies kind of impact how we should be critiquing these movies, Nathaniel. And I think sometimes you do this a little much with the Scream movies. So tell me why you want to give this movie a bit of a break.
So the break here is, we're looking at, a huge social moment in time that they were responding to, and so I'll give them that like, toning it down. At the end of the day, I think, the key to what makes Scream movies isn't necessarily the gore, but it tends to be the clever writing. And a lot of that is present in this film. It's still extremely meta. In fact, maybe even more meta than some of the other films in the series in a lot of ways. But a lot of that kind of core DNA is still definitely present, and I still enjoy those elements of the film, even though, undeniably, this is the weakest film in the series. I still, really enjoy watching it, though.
Fair.
Like a lot of times, if a series has a bad sequel, I will have watched it once and will never watch it again. I can watch Scream 3 whenever, and I'm down. Like, obviously, I'd be more down to watch the others, but still, someone's like, hey, let's throw on Scream 3. Yeah, I'll sit and watch it again. But that's not the same with most other horror series. Most other horror series, one and done, for most of especially the sequels.
Right, okay. I can allow that. For me, I think my biggest reason for not liking this movie is primarily that what you just kind of were talking about, this idea that they watered it down for social pressure issues, which I understand.
Mm-hmm.
I think cognizant about that is important. However, I feel like the writing, it wasn't as tongue-in-cheek. It felt very kind of cheesy at times, which the Scream franchise is. It is cheesy, but it's also poignant and relevant and makes sense. And this movie just leaned into the camp a little bit too much for me. It made me not as afraid.
Yeah, no, I think that is perfectly fair. Because, yeah, it is by far the cheesiest in the series. Particularly that it spends so much time. We have the idea of the events of Scream 1 being turned into a movie in Scream 2. That's our cold open. With the Stab series. With this one, this is already now putting us in Hollywood in the middle of that. That's layers of meta that are honestly, might be a step too far, honestly. I felt like sometimes there were some fun moments with that and some clever ideas. Like, for example, the character Jennifer, Parker Posey's character, the one who is the actress playing Gale Weathers. Some of the stuff with her was actually like interesting and fun, but other than that, the actors that were playing our main characters were kind of weak and uninteresting characters themselves, and it just felt like it was a bit too silly. Again, like, there's some really great set pieces and some great ideas. Like, I love the chase of Sydney through the sets that resemble her own house and her own town, and then, she opens a door and falls through a thing because it's, not actually how it really corresponds or things like that. That was fun. But again, like, did we really have to have it set in Hollywood? Did it have to have particularly the weakest villain that is related to her? And, like, it gets very cliche.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about Scream 3 is kind of, again, that metaverse of the kind of film set. That's a cool and fun idea and an interesting way for Sidney Prescott to kind of look at her reflection and face her fears without having to go back to her hometown. I'm surprised more movies, especially more franchised movies, don't do something like this. Think about Halloween or even Freddy Krueger. I think there's a lot of fun idea there to kind of replicate these stories and make the main characters, the legacy characters, face their fears again. Hold on, Nathaniel. I cannot believe we have made it this far without talking about the most abysmal and horrific, terrifying part of Scream 3.
Oh, I was getting to it.
Gale Weathers' hair. Those bangs.
So, a lot of times we talk about how this one is the only one that has one villain. No, there's still two villains. The other one is her hair.
This hair, if you have not had any exposure to this haircut, everyone needs to just take a minute and Google search, because it will blow your mind.
And Courtney Cox is bullied for it regularly to this day. And you know what? I don't endorse bullying people, especially for, like a thing in a movie. But I get it.
Oh, it's crazy, guys. It's crazy. Go check it out. It's amazing. Anyway, back to your regularly programmed schedule program. I don't know what I'm going to say now.
So, can I say another thing that I do like about this film?
Of course.
I really like the idea that, like, Sydney is so deeply, like, messed up after having experienced not just one, but now two massacres of friends and loved ones. Like, that I think is one of the smartest ideas, is that Sydney spends most of the film nowhere near this situation. That she is far away, she has, can't be contacted easily, all of that. Great idea. But
I know what you're gonna say.
If part of how you are being haunted by people, for both of those massacres, involves getting phone calls, why the actual hell would you work a job being a trauma counselor over the phone?
Because it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, this was weird. I wonder if they were trying to like do the thing where, she's so traumatized that she has this great experience that will help her relate to these other trauma victims, which is fine, cool. I mean, it just feels very contrived. It feels very artificial. The Sidney Prescott that I know from the first movie is smarter than that.
Yeah, well, and also, like, I guess just in terms of, like, even looking at Wes Craven's own career. So, he made Nightmare on Elm Street, and then he was one of the big kind of, like, writers slash idea guys on the third film that kind of did the same thing with Heather Langenkamp's character, coming back. So now we have Nancy being this, psychiatrist or trauma counselor or something for the other characters. And that worked really well. And so it seems like it was trying to replicate that same idea in Scream 3. And I know also, like, behind the scenes, some of this boiled down to, our actress for Sydney, Nev Campbell, was, had some scheduling conflicts or things like that, so she wasn't able to be on the set the whole time, and so that's part of why they had her away for the whole time. I'm sure that, like, maybe it would have had a different shape, but I don't know. It just, really? She's answering phones all day, every single day? I wouldn't answer the phone for myself ever again in my life after that.
Yeah.
Like, screw that.
I think another big issue for me of Scream 3 is the motivation of the killer.
Yep.
This is where the plot really kind of goes out of control. We have this kind of movie director who all of a sudden we find out is Sidney Prescott's long lost like half brother from Hollywood because her mom was a star and she didn't want to have him, and now he's out to get revenge, and it was him behind the scenes of the events of the first movie. Like, there's just a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it was too much. He was a weak character. He wasn't that interesting. That whole idea was extremely contrived. I will say, and this is the thing that we were kind of alluding to with Scream 2 relative to the idea of sexism, it is very interesting, this plot, relative to the fact that this film came out in 2000, which is many years before Me Too. But it very, very clearly indicates, like, how widely it's known. Hey, a lot of, people that are powerful in Hollywood are basically, taking advantage of / just straight up raping a lot of, actresses that are desperate to get jobs. So I think, I guess from a social artifact kind of point, like, this is kind of an interesting thing that we can point to and say, like, hey, this problem, has been known about very widely for a very long time. It just, no one was doing anything about it until a lot of women got angry and started demanding that something did get changed. And so, like, that's an interesting thing to look at. And I think, if nothing else, Scream 3 is an interesting artifact, considering that, from a like historical, sociological kind of standpoint. But yeah, I don't know how to feel about it, and I don't feel like it was necessarily great for this plot. In fact, I thought it was kind of, frankly, terrible. But it is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's one of the cases where things can be two things, right? Like, it can be an artifact of the times and show us that this stuff was present in this time period, but unless it says something about that hey, this is bad, this is wrong, at its core, it can still be a sexist movie. It could be an artifact of the times and not address the problem.
And I think, it is acknowledging this is a problem, but it definitely wasn't really offering any good solutions.
Does it? I don't think it acknowledges that it's a problem. I mean, the killer, of course, is a product of this kind of broken home, but there's no call out of these executives or these producers sleeping with the women.
No. They come after the big producer, and go like, oh, like, this happened, and like, you just didn't care. But it didn't do it nearly as strongly as I wanted. It was there. It's in it. It's just it was kind of a throwaway little bit as opposed to, hey, like this is deeply upsetting, and also like maybe that should be what we're attacking way more than attacking Sydney. It's just that it gets so muddled with everything else that's going on that even though that is present, it becomes almost an afterthought. But yeah, I agree. They needed to be that. I don't know. Just this isn't the film to tackle that. Is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, I agree. If that's going to be some sort of a plot, then it needs to kind of be at the forefront. To me, it came off as, hey, this is happening. All these people are doing it, and that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And then we move on. There was no acknowledgement that it needed action because there's this killer on the loose, right? Like,
yes.
As you say, I agree with you. This is not the medium to talk about, equal rights feminism.
Yeah, and actually, I am gonna also acknowledge, yeah, like there is, I think, a big failure in the film too, in that it does make some jokes about it in a way that was honestly tasteless and kind of awful. With Carrie Fisher's character going, oh well, I'm not the one that slept with George Lucas, so yeah. That was honestly just like it wasn't funny. It wasn't like, I don't know, it was turning it into a joke, which that's not helpful for an issue that intense. So yeah, no, I'm gonna backpedal.
No worries. Let's rate this one because I just want to move along.
So screams wise, 2.
Yeah, I gave it a 2 as well.
There's some fun minor peril, but yeah, that's about it. Crowns, I'm gonna give it a 5.5. I would still, say like, it's on the better side of again, it's a movie that I'm willing to rewatch whenever, even though it is by far the least good in the series.
Yeah, I gave it a 4. It just, I don't know. I did not feel the love with this movie really at all. I got bored. I wanted to make fun of it more than actually watch it, and that usually only happens when we watch terrible movies that we have roasted before. So
yeah, I get it. I like it more than you, but I mean, I get
and that's
it.
fine. That's fine. All right. Shall we move on to Scream 4?
Here is my Woodsboro Massacre anniversary question. What is your favorite scary movie?
What's your favorite scary movie?
One generation's tragedy is the next one's a joke.
What is your favorite scary movie, man?
I'll show you.
This week marks the anniversary of the infamous Woodsboro murders. Local celebrity victim Sydney Prescott chose to return to her hometown.
Welcome home, Sydney.
So I guess right off the bat, as with any other Scream movie, it does a good job of the meta, and this time, in this case, kind of looking at reboots and how it can be a struggle to breathe life into a franchise that is effectively done.
Yeah, Scream 4 is a fun, again, kind of meta-analysis on horror genre and franchised movies as well, where it's a remake, but it also feels like a sequel. It's kind of this weird hodgepodge of a movie that, for me, really worked. I really liked Scream 4.
Oh, yeah. Scream 4 is almost tied with 2 for me. Like, they're both really fun movies. I love them both a lot.
Yeah, it's this really cool idea where we are now kind of entering into the age of technology, and how does that look for the Scream killers? What are they going to do to adapt to their new quote-unquote audience?
Mm-hmm.
And the cast is pretty fun as well. We've got some kind of early stars, such as Emma Roberts, who I really enjoy. She's kind of the titular villain of this one.
And also, we have, like a pretty studded cast in a lot of ways. Lucy Hale. We have even, Kristen Bell and Anna Paquin at the beginning. We have Alison Brie. We have Hayden Panettiere. We have lots of like really fun actresses. Kind of studying the cast, and I'd say I really love the cold opening of this one. It's like ridiculous, but it's really fun.
It's so great. Do you want to give just a quick little synopsis here?
We see, kind of your conventional horror, or specifically a Scream kind of cold open with someone, getting killed, and then it kind of like zooms out, and then we see Kristen Bell and Anna Paquin's characters, watching it and going like this is so ridiculous, like, just kind of like making fun of it, and then Kristen Bell's character kind of gets pissed off and then stabs Anna Paquin's character, and then it's suddenly, goes out another layer, and then it's, we see that was stab 7 or something, and then we, finally get into the actual movie, and so it's, we get to see what the stab movies have turned into with these layered, ridiculous meta, commentaries on the genre that, much like the Scream series has become, but like to a point that it's become a ridiculous parody of itself, which is a delight to see that, like, they're acknowledging, like, hey, that could happen with our own series.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe Scream 4. When I rewatched it and was explaining it to my boyfriend, it was tricky for me back then as well, because it feels like Scream 1, but it's not. It's very different. It almost feels a little more meta to some extent, and maybe that's just because it is talking about the technology age, and so a lot of the stuff, is what we grew up with, the handheld recorders, the webcams, these early computers that people really didn't know, the potential that this stuff had. And this movie, I don't know, I really like that. Maybe it's just the nostalgia bomb.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, our generation, particularly, us as, almost being 32, like, this movie dropped in 2011, that was us when we were in early college. We were, I don't know, we were just like the right age for this one, when it came out. So, I think definitely, we were able to appreciate a lot of the things that it was doing with the technology and stuff like that maybe some other audiences might not have appreciated as much, and maybe that's why this film didn't do as well, particularly commercially, which I think is a shame, because I think it's one of the best ones in the series.
Yeah, I agree. I think the grit is back in Scream 4 as well. There's a lot of moments that are really pretty spooky, especially towards the end with Emma Roberts. She's in the hospital and she's trying to stab Sidney with this like giant shard of glass, and that always just kind of gets to me. But it's gritty, it's gory, but again, it kind of goes back to the roots of Scream 1 and brings in this tongue-in-cheek dialogue. These one-liners that feel very almost Evil Dead, where they just kind of poke characters in a very silly way, but is still scary.
Yeah, I definitely would say, like, this is definitely, a return to form back from Scream 3. It's also fun to see, again, the characters have continued to develop. We see Sidney, who has kind of, like, reclaimed her identity and not let, the past totally just dominate everything that she is. But, that she's able to kind of, she's written a book about it, and she's trying to be, a productive, fully realized woman. And that here we see her, as confident and competent and very proactive. We see Dewey as the sheriff, and we get to see that he's now married to Gail, which is kind of a fun dynamic. It's just fun to see that these characters have grown up in really fun ways.
And going back to Scream 2, they have learned from the mistakes of the past. They have evolved fully, I think. They are young adults. They're trying to figure out life. It's very relatable for a lot of people who grew up watching this franchise.
I also liked a lot of the new characters. Like, not every single one was great, but the majority, I quite enjoyed. I definitely agree. Like, I know, like, when this new film dropped, there was, like, a little teeny reference to one of the characters who we thought died in this one, Kirby, played by Hayden Panettiere.
Yeah.
But, like, apparently she survived, and so, like, people are like, oh, sweet, like, hey, like, is she going to come back in number 6, which, by the way, just got announced. But, like, I like these characters, and I felt like they were definitely stronger and funner than, even a lot of the characters that I would say that we get in most of the other sequels. they were good. They were fun to engage with.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the story that I really liked Emma Roberts' motivation here. She's the niece of Sidney Prescott. She's grown up in kind of the shadow of Sidney, which has caused her a lot of turmoil and a lot of jealousy at the end of the day. So her motivation here is to kill Sidney and kind of recreate the events of the first Scream, but she is now the main character. It goes back to that meta-ness of Scream, of our villain wants to be the hero, and she's going to set it up to try and get that accomplished, which is just clever. It's fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's unique and original.
Yeah, it definitely works better than pretty much any of the other sequels in terms of the villain's motivations. Definitely, a strong point for this one. Were there things that you didn't like as much about this one?
We talked about some of the characters being a lot of fun, but there were some that were just obnoxious. There's the shaky camera guy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that kid having that camera attached to his face and being like, "This is the future. This is how everyone's going to be living their high school experience." Oh my gosh. It was he was too much.
There's also the moment where, as a queer individual, we're still in the early 2010s where being gay was kind of a joke.
Yeah.
And they use this of, this camera guy, this obnoxious camera guy is about to die, and he, instead of the virgin not being killed, it's now the gay person isn't being killed. But he is not gay. It's clear that he's not gay. And so it comes off as this is his last card to play before he dies, and it doesn't sit well for some people.
Yeah, it was definitely kind of dipping back into the meta humor well, but in a way that really just felt tacky.
Again, the Scream franchise is stellar, but it still is rooted in its time, and I'm glad we're moving out of that. It reminds me a lot of kind of the early Office, early Big Bang Theory, where
being gay is a punchline.
Yeah, it was just kind of barely peeping its head into kind of modern social zeitgeist and pop culture. And instead of it being accepted, it was accepted with this pointed tongue. Yeah, you can have a gay character in our show, but they're going to be a joke.
Yep.
And I'm glad we've moved past that. Mostly, you look at shows like Good Place, or hell, even this new Netflix Chainsaw Massacre. Just being queer isn't a plot point anymore, and that is refreshing. All right, let's wrap it up. Let's talk about Screams.
Okay, so my Screams for Scream 4, I would give it a 4. It, is back to about Scream 2 levels of creepy.
Yeah, I gave it a 5. I really appreciated the grit back. I think I rated this one a little bit higher just because I had watched 3 the day before. Mm-hmm. And so in some regard, I was very happy and refreshed to see that the horror was back. So I probably was a little bit more affected by the grit and the gore.
Crowns-wise, I gave it a 7. Yeah, I would say it's really pretty much tied with 2 for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I gave it a 7 as well. It's not the original. It's not this Scream 5 that we got even. But it is solid. I think it's my second favorite of the entire series.
So over 5?
I can't remember what I gave in our last... I don't know. I really liked Scream 4. I'm going to have to go back and listen to our last episode to see where I rated them all.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it compares. For me, it's... I guess technically my 4th out of 5, but it's I don't know. I really freaking love this movie still. It's a delight. So I don't know. I have nothing but good to say about it for 99% of the time. Well, how have you been staying spooky lately?
I've been watching a lot of horror media lately, and the two I want to talk about first and foremost would be I found this YouTube channel called Chilling Scares. And I have probably watched all of the videos that they have to offer, and they are all about authentic, real life Ring camera scary moments, or dash cam scary moments, or the Amazon Echo camera scary moments. These
Mm-hmm.
these technology devices that have opened up our eyes to the craziness that happens in the world. And this stuff is batshit spooky, Nathaniel. There are some crazy videos out there. One in particular of this lady is outside her house and she hears screaming, and then this car drives by her front yard, and there is a girl like getting kidnapped. You hear her screaming and asking for help as the car drives away, and it was all caught on a Ring camera. It's gross. Check it out. It got me really bad. The other day, someone knocked on my door, and I was working in my room, and I got up to go get it, and then all of these flashbacks happened of this YouTube channel, and I was like, nope, I don't know who's out there. I'm not answering the door. I broke down and bought my own Ring camera, and am now looking for aliens on a daily basis.
That sounds about right.
But outside of that, me and Mark went to go see The Cursed in movie theaters last night. It's this new kind of period piece about the 18th century, this little French town, and supernatural events that happen. Because it's in movie theaters, I don't want to just give it away for everybody. But all I will say is I was pleasantly surprised. It's not Hereditary. It's not any sort of art horror kind of masterpiece. But it's not a Blumhouse dumpster fire. It's a solid, good, scary movie that has some really cool creatures in it.
And to be clear, sometimes Blumhouse has delightful horror movies, but, we're still bitter about Halloween Kills. No, that sounds great. I remember we saw the trailer for that while we were seeing Scream together. And yes. So I've been curious about it, so I'm glad to hear that it's pretty decent.
It's definitely not a perfect movie, and after we had finished watching it, talking about it with friends, it kind of dawned on me that, okay, maybe this movie isn't as good as I was excited about.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean it's not a good, scary movie. It just didn't deliver like others.
Before I share how I've been staying spooky, I just looked at what you rated Scream 5, and you gave it a 7.5. So it technically edges out 4 for you, unless you want to, reevaluate.
Let me pray about it.
Okay, so I have been staying spooky lately. I've been reading lots of stuff. I've been watching lots of stuff. It has been a little bit of a gap since our last episode, so needless to say, I've consumed lots of content. But one that was particularly interesting to me was a book that is just about to come out called Kagan the Damned. That's Kagen. Maybe it's Cajun. I don't know. I
actually have a friend with that name. It is pronounces it Kagan.
Kagan. Okay. Well, so Kagan the Damned. This is a fantasy novel by Jonathan Mayberry, who I believe I've ranted about how amazing some of his stuff is, particularly his Pine Deep trilogy of horror novels. But this one is like high, kind of epic, grimdark fantasy. But why I'm bringing it up with staying spooky is what it uses as the kind of pantheon of gods is the gods of Lovecraft and Machen, where we have these things like Cthulhu and Hastur, and all of these different kind of gods are kind of what make up a lot of the pantheon of gods in this world. And so it's basically Lovecraftian horror, but it's a grimdark fantasy story about revenge. It's dropping soon. I got my hands on an advanced reader copy, so yeah, I had to check it out because Jonathan Mayberry. But it's really interesting. I would say I'd probably give it like 6 out of 10 in terms of like ultimately like the story did get a little bogged down at times, and it has a little bit of Deus Ex Machina kind of near the end. But as a whole, though, like just that idea of really, really leaning into the Lovecraft mythology with a high fantasy story, yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, that's cool. Love that.
I think that pretty much is everything we were going to talk about.
believe so. So if you are still listening, thank you once again. We do have some cool special guests lined up for the show. One of our good friends, Charlie Conlon from the Know Your Nightmares podcast, wants to come back to talk about some of his sleep paralysis moments.
Mm-hmm.
Very excited to talk to him. Great guy. Love him. Also, I have a old coworker who grew up in a sweet little Mexican pueblito, and she has a bunch of authentic Mexican kind of pueblito horror stories to talk to us about.
I'm very excited about that.
So we're excited. We do have some good stuff. Thank you for your patience as we live our lives.
Yeah, and not just those two guests. We also have two others. Kat from the TGIF horror podcast, and also maybe a returning guest, Rachel Smith, who has talked to us about lots of spooky stuff before. If you're listening to this podcast, I imagine you've probably listened to one or both of her episodes. I would say she's driven more traffic to our podcast than anyone else.
Us included.
Yeah. By many orders of magnitude. So, yeah, we're excited to tease all of those episodes. They should be, slowly filling up your podcast feed over the next couple of months.
All right, and in the meantime, stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Need even more Scream Kings? Here's our obligatory shameless social media plug. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Scream Kings Pod. You could also email us at screamkingspodcast@gmail.com. Help us reach a wider audience of horror fans by leaving a review on iTunes or by sharing a link on social media. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/Scream Kings. Stay spooky.